Good morning and welcome back. Episode 22 that we did last 2 weeks ago. We actually went to, so we're going to probably do a touch of follow-up. But we're here with a familiar guest today. John Howard sitting in front of me. He wore a different hat last time he was here. I'm going to have him introduce his other hat he's going to be wearing. Excited to have you back. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So for those who didn't catch the 22nd episode, was it?
21, I think. Yeah.
My name is John Howard III. I'm a New York State licensed home inspector. The name of my company is Tri-City Pro Home Inspections.
Yeah. For those of you who were in the room, just us today, right. I had forgotten all of his title. It's Tri-City
Pro Home Inspection.
Yes. Is that like the website link too?
It is the website link.
Fantastic. And we said it twice, so people are going to remember.
Yes,
beautiful.
Nice
so, now you're one of the 3 home inspectors I plug a lot to my clients. It's because I trust you to do a good job.
Yep.
I trust you to be thorough, make mountains out of mountains and molehills out of molehills. Correct. And not vice versa. Right.
Yep.
And one of the things I always have my clients do is my clients and I, by the time we get to this point, are generally friends.
Right.
I don't want to talk to them, do I?
Right. No.
I am there to open doors, and sometimes you're like, hey, Dave, what's this or what's that? And I'll come in.
Yep.
But I stand outside or I talk to the tenants. Right. Why is that important? Like, I want to ask, what is the agent's role 99% of the time in a home inspection?
It varies from agent to agent, but what I prefer is for an agent to grant us access and be able to set the foreground for what the expectation is for me as far as an inspector. So one of the kind of hot button issues that a lot of home buyers run into is they think that there's a pass or fail with regard to an inspection.
I love it. Where else would we see a pass or fail and a sticker on a windshield? Oh, where else would we see that? Because we have to do it every year.
Car registration.
Yeah, it's because that's the thing we deal with most.
Right.
Right. So people are like, hey, I want my title.
Right.
Print my title. I said, there's no title for a house. There's a deed.
Right.
Title isn't printed because we always go back to what we're familiar with.
Correct.
So not a pass fail.
Right.
And when you buy the house, title isn't something you print up.
Correct.
Cool. So open the door. I want you to tell me, like, what is the setup you want? What is the?
So typically, a client may come to me via referral.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate the fact that you've used me quite a few times. And I ask some open door questions. What's the size of the house? Where is it located? Is the property occupied? Some basic rudimentary information. I can look up the house on the web and obviously get some ideas. And what I want to do with my clients and with my agents is try to make them as informed as possible. So my job is not to determine necessarily pass or fail. My job is to point out the conditions as we see it and what my recommendations are to be able to get this house to close.
And you're able to see every single problem a house has, right? You're there 2 hours. You can see through walls.
I wish it was that simple. So what we do, and that's a great question, we do a non-intrusive inspection in New York State. So what does that mean? That does mean that I can maybe move a piece of insulation from time to time and look and see what the sheathing looks like in an attic. But I can't remove sheetrock, right? Mm-hmm. Even if I use an infrared camera and I'm looking for void information with regard to temperature change, it's not something that I can say definitively what's going on behind that wall. So to a certain extent, we're going to look at what we can see. We're going to try to test different things, and then we're going to base on standard building practices what we think the condition should be relative to how old the house is.
Okay. So there's a couple times I actually don't recommend home inspections, and I'm going to lay it out because 99% of the time I do.
Yep.
We steal the house.
Yes.
We get a $100,000 house for $10,000.
Right.
There's a reason we picked it up for $10K, right?
I agree.
And if I showed you a $10,000 house or a city property,
right,
would you recommend either of those for a first-time home buyer that doesn't know the hammer aisle from the wood aisle?
Yeah, in my opinion, I would steer clear of that because there's just so many variables that you know, it would be a lot to take on. Even some of the DIY guys, run into problems because there's a lot of issues in terms of disposal. Is there hazardous material? Mm-hmm. What the permits are we going to have a structural engineer? These houses have been vacant for a lot of times and for a long time. A lot of damage has gotten, to conditions that maybe you might even need a demo. You might need to tear the house down prior to trying to renovate it. So for somebody that's a first-time home buyer, I think that is a bit of a challenge.
Yeah. No, I agree. But I don't set a dollar threshold.
Yes.
There are houses that you can get in certain areas around here follow me on my Facebook thing, and I post all the ones. I'm talking about Amsterdam, Cloversville.
Yep.
Where if you can get a house you can get a livable house or with tenants for 60, 70, 80,000, and yeah, there might be a couple of problems, but that house somewhere else would be 200,000 even in its same condition.
Correct.
So I don't put like a dollar threshold on it.
Right.
I say, okay, does my client know what they're getting at the price? And if the question is, okay, we're buying a house near normal market value or top of market value, absolutely, we need to inspect it. Or someone says, hey, I've never done this before. I need a home that's FHA compliant and I cannot do any work on it. I'm like, well, then of course we have to.
Well, that brings me to another service that I offer too. So even in both scenarios, I have what's called the pre-inspection. I do post-inspections, and I do full-on structural inspections. So hypothetically, if you had a client and you said to your client, listen, we know we're buying this house as is, but to get another set of eyes on it, we can bring in an inspector for a fraction of the cost, and he can tell you some of the things that he sees. What differs with regard from my pre-inspection to my full-on inspection is that I'm not going to take pictures and upload a report and give you an actual document. But I have no problem with climbing in the basement, getting in the attic, trying to get access to the roof. In most of the cases, these properties don't have running water, but I'll test whatever I can, and I have no problem with the client or the agent walking around taking notes. So now you do have some sort of idea of some of the things that you're looking at and a better evaluation of that property. And the cost associated with that is only $100. So
yeah. And I think before we have an offer accepted, if we have a client that's a little worried about, on the fence or just absolutely risk averse, I think the $100 is a great spend.
Definitely, especially when you consider one of the things I do is if you say you want a pre-inspection, you can pay me $100 for a pre-inspection, and I come out. And based on what you see in the pre-inspection, you want to move forward with the same purchase. But now you're going to need a full-on inspection for your realtor, for your attorney, for that closing process. Yeah. I'll return back to that exact same house, and I'll credit you $50 from that.
That's pretty great. So I have a few other home inspectors that I've worked with, and they'll do a pre-sale inspection.
Right.
And it's very different because now we're switching hats from the buyer to the seller.
Correct.
And the benefit of that, in my mind, is, hey, look, every Tom, Dick, and Jane is going to get a home inspection.
Right.
Why don't we get one?
Right.
We identify the positive and negative. Right. Why don't we address some of them?
Right.
Offer them back that pre-sale inspection with notes saying, yeah, we fix this, we fix that.
Right.
We circle this. We'll give $1,000 credit max, and we're going to sell it as is.
Yep.
But we've already identified the problems. We've corrected a couple.
Yep.
And here it is.
Excellent idea. And the reason why is because sometimes you do have inspectors that will go in there with an agent and look to just beat the seller up on the price. So they'll go in there and they'll point out a bunch of different things. You alluded to it earlier when you talked about making a mountain out of a molehill. It could be a relatively small problem, but a real estate inspector can come in there and say, hey, well, this is going to cost X amount of dollars, just knowing that that's a leverage tool to negotiate a lower price.
Yeah. There's a lot of techniques out there that can work favorably, but we're in a seller's market. I don't want to like give too much power to any one side. It's still a partnership. Hey, this is a number that we agreed on. This makes sense for condition.
Right.
But there are you can beat up a seller to a point where the moment you start negotiating, that opens the door for both buyer and seller.
Correct.
And if you come through that door swinging and it's not appropriate, right? If it's a major issue and it is appropriate, come swinging, whatever, But if you're swinging like crazy on a $1,600 issue or a $2,100 issue, and you want $30,000 for a $1,600 issue or 21 piece, I'm going $100 over the thresholds from the last two types of contracts, whatever. It's not going to be well received,
especially in this market because there's so much competition. So what people do sometimes is they'll offer over list in hopes of being able to use the inspection to reduce that price to where they want to be in the first place.
Yeah, and it does get to a point where I think that can make sense. But if I had 5 backup offers within $200, and you come in and looking for $20,000, I'll roll the dice and pick the next. So
correct.
So, anyways, not every home in the United States has public sewer and water.
Correct.
So we've had my dad, the home inspector, he came on. It was great. It was fun. But I want to talk about the differences now between a city home and a town home or a country home.
Okay.
Specifically about waste and supply and wastewater, I want to talk about basically the differentiations between the two that you would look for and say, hey, because we're here, I want to look at this more specifically, and hey, because we're here, I want to look at that. So either side you want to jump on, take it away.
Obviously with city water, chances are you got a regular sewer, and you're going to have a water main and a sewer drain that are tied directly into a municipality. And for a variety of reasons, that comes with a certain level of security, saying that this water most likely has been treated, so on and so forth. But on the exact same side, oftentimes when you have these city properties, you might have a tree. You might have tree frontage in that front yard, which could potentially put pressure on that sewer water or on that supply line. So that's something to worry about too. On the flip side, when we go out to look at some of our rural properties that may have a well, I test for water pressure, see how much, how many gallons per minute the actual well is producing. We take water samples. We send that off to a lab to make sure the water is actually healthy.
I want to pause you there.
Okay.
What are you looking for specifically in well water?
A variety of different things, but there's different kind of bacteria that we're testing for with regard to water. A lot of times water will have a foul smell, may have sulfate, and that might turn off the buyers. We're looking for any kind of minerals that are in that water, anything that would make that water not high, but actually hard, and would kind of affect maybe some of the plumbing that comes into the house. There's a whole range of different things that the water requirements are looking for with respect to wells.
Now, I'm familiar with coliform bacteria.
Coliform bacteria.
Which is bacteria from poop.
Yes.
Right?
From feces, yep.
Totally understandable why we want to drink that.
Correct.
But there are methods to clean a well or shock a well. You don't say, hey, look, let's just drill a new well 500 feet further away, right?
Correct.
All right. And who would you put that onus on to shock a well or to clean the well or try to...
So it's a very good question. So because you're looking on the buyer side or you're looking on the seller side, if I was representing the buyer, I would make sure that we tested this water and gave them the results and allowed them to know that now that we've got these results, this seller is now obligated to tell any potential buyer after the fact that this water has been tested.
Super interesting.
Yeah, so we got a disclosure there. So
I didn't know there was a mandated disclosure on something like that.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
Yeah, so now that what that does is that makes them say, at some point I may have to address this and fix it anyway.
Sure.
So I would hope that the onus would be on the seller to kind
It should be, right?
Yeah,
I mean, when we sell a home, it should be...
Correct, safe.
Unless we're given a great discount.
Correct.
It should be...
And we're saying
it should be what we expect. Yep.
100%.
So where would a coliform bacteria generally come from? Or because I understand that we're talking aquifer, we're talking hard water, we're talking sulfur and sulfates, high or low pH. We're talking aquifer. There's nothing to change. You want water, that's where it comes from. But where does the bacteria come from?
I've heard a bunch of different things. It depends if you have an open wellhead.
Okay.
Depends. So well water actually comes from underground. There could be neighboring streams. There could be animals that are using the streams and is carrying some of that water. There's a variety of different ways that you can get a lot of that harmful bacteria.
Okay. Is there often a concern that the house's own sewer system could be contributing?
Yeah. So if a lot of times when you have a well, you may have a septic system.
Yep.
You may have a leach field.
Yep.
If you got a septic system or a leach field, and either one of those are leaking, that can kind of contaminate some of that well water.
Yeah. As a home inspector, do you test the well? We know the well. We were talking flow rate. You said gallons per minute.
Yes.
What are you looking for? Like 5 gallons a minute or something?
Yes.
And then you test.
Good,
some of my questions I know the answer to, but not everyone does.
Okay.
So there's some of that stuff we can't deal with. But when it comes to the wastewater, what kind of tests are done on? I mean, I assume if 5 gallons is coming in the house, 5 gallons got to go out the house.
Correct.
Is there a certain amount of time you let that run, or are we doing?
So they talk about different tests. So you can hook up to your exterior water supply, like where your hose would be.
Okay.
Oftentimes, I like to go directly into the bathroom. I'll go into the main bathroom. I'll take a 5-gallon bucket and I'll run that at full bore, and I'll time it to kind of see how long it takes to fill up that 5-gallon bucket, and I'll record it. That way, we have a baseline. But what I will tell you is those times vary. So you may have a well that runs really well in the beginning, and then as time goes on,
so the water battery drains.
Correct.
It starts to fill.
Correct. Right. It's not as consistent.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So how do we test the septic tank besides having someone come out and do a more intrusive, yank the lid off, and actually look at it?
Right.
Is there any way to test flow through rate or anything like that?
Yes and no. One of the things that I do is I turn on all the appliances that I can.
All the water appliances.
Yeah. So I'm talking about your bathroom fixtures, your shower fixtures, and then I'm going to flush the toilet, right? 'Cause
Sure.
I want to see what kind of drop in pressure is.
You need to stress the system to make sure.
It's very unlikely that you're using all three at the exact same time. But for my testing purposes, I want to do that.
I'm thinking now of all the times you see in movies where someone's in the shower and everyone flushes the toilets at the same time and they
Changes
scream.
the temperature. Yeah.
So the moment you start saying that, I'm like in a prank video where they're throwing water at someone or okay. I'm sorry for the diversion.
Nope, that's fine. But so that's one of the things that I look for. I also try to pay attention to what is the supply line made out of. So if I get into the basement and I can see that we got cast iron, chances are that pipe's original to the house.
Okay.
If the house is an older house, maybe that's an older pipe. It's going to have more corrosion and more buildup in it. If I see the new PVC stuff, chances are when they converted to the PVC, they probably more than likely snaked it out before they added that.
Okay.
And what we know about PVC is it doesn't break down and corrode the same way metal does.
No, I have seen, because I had one actually wear through a lead sleeve underneath the toilet.
Wow.
It was a lead like funnel.
Yes.
That goes into the cast iron. So that way, I guess, no matter where you put the toilet, you could kind of make your adjustments because lead is very soft.
Correct.
I've seen one on a leaking toilet where that constant water literally eroded and cut the lead in half.
Right.
And that was tough to call a plumber out, and he's like, "You have lead." He's like, "Yeah, well, it's common like in city homes in Albany.
Right.
If you haven't swapped the toilet out in 30 or 40 or 50 years, or when you did 30, 40, 50 years ago, if you didn't change stuff, you still have."
And then to have that lead,
stuff.
we know is linked to another host of neurological issues. So
luckily, that was around a toilet and was going out instead of coming in.
Line, right?
But there are still lead pipes in use.
Correct.
Right. I remember I did a 316 9th Street, my favorite house on 9th Street in Troy. Mine at one point, not anymore.
Okay.
And I went and I paid $75 for a soft lead hookup compression fitting to another size fitting to go to soft copper.
Okay.
And it was a tear down house or near one, and when they dug and pulled the sewer line out, they filled that with concrete.
Okay.
Except just enough that I could still use the toilets for 3 years and didn't know.
Okay.
And I watched them rip my $75 worth of fittings out and go to the new line and put a new line in.
Right.
And I'm sitting here, I'm like, $75 in 2010
Right.
was a lot.
Right.
I realize $75 today is like 2 Big Macs.
Right.
Or 2 unlabeled sandwiches from a fast food place.
Right. Be careful.
Not a sponsor.
Right.
And yeah, so it was amazing to me to still see it. And I think I saw or heard something that there are still original wood pipes in places in New York City where they like hollow out a log.
I haven't seen any, but I wouldn't be surprised.
It was somewhere in there. They were talking about how many hundreds or thousands of feet of original wood is still carrying water in New York City, and I was blown away.
Yeah. So what I will tell you is, our infrastructure in this country, all over, not just New York State, is crumbling.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff was built a long time ago. Materials and education has changed a great deal. A lot of new code requirements would say a lot of that stuff has to get ripped out. So I'm glad that you were able to avoid that too much of a problem in Troy, right?
It was only 4 inches of lead.
Okay.
But it was amazing that the extra 7, 8, 10 inches to connect from one soft metal to go to the rigid to then go soft copper in the house was a lot of money.
Right.
And then when they replaced it, I was glad they replaced it. You know, even an inch of lead we'd say is too little.
Right.
Though not the main source of lead poisoning. That's paint.
Right. That is
right.
paint.
Let's go ahead and say lead in your water, not great.
Right.
Peeling, flaking lead paint on your house where a kid can get it, far worse.
Far worse.
Far worse.
And we're seeing some legislation come down with regard to that. So our governor is adamant about trying to make these homes safer, and there's going to be some mandates that we see in the near future about lead renovations.
Do you want to pivot to that for a second?
I don't mind because I think it's relevant. And part of the reason why I think it's relevant is because what we know is that low income to moderate housing, oftentimes people don't have a choice, right? If you only
I completely agree, completely disagree.
Okay.
Because we have to change some things in houses. We've updated electrical sometimes. We've updated some plumbing. why, if I've had a house that I know has lead paint in it, why is there no mandate at some point? Hey, I'm going to give you 5 years. I'm going to put a $50,000 lien on you for each house that hasn't been lead abated, and I'll give you 5 years to do it. But
you're talking about from a landowner's perspective.
Yeah, well, yes, but if I couldn't rent,
correct,
because I couldn't get a rental certificate, ROP or whatever,
correct,
and I had 5 years to get it. So if I owned a car, which we all do, or a lot of people do, not all, but a lot of people do, especially in my field. I drive 1,000 miles a week on a busy week.
Okay,
I know that I need to change the oil and do maintenance on my car, otherwise it breaks down and it won't work for me anymore.
Right.
Why can't I, as a landlord, say, hey, I own a house and I need to do maintenance on it, but next year when I get an inspection, which is pass and fail because a car, not a house, I won't get the pass because I haven't done lead in 5 years, and the last lead paint was 1976.
Yes, so that's the hot button year.
So what the hell's going on, dude? That's 50 years minus 2. That's 48 years ago. Why haven't I painted my house yet?
Yeah, so it's a whole host of reasons. But what I will tell you is that at one point, paint had an additive lead, which allowed it to be more durable.
Yeah.
So it was actually celebrated and it was touted in certain paints.
Yeah.
So now what we found out over time, you get more educated that this lead paint can have kidney issues, can lead to neurological issues, can lead to a lot of these issues. And the people that are exposed to it oftentimes aren't the actual landlord.
That's right.
So if I live in municipal housing, there's limitations in terms of what I could do.
Yes.
So part of what you were saying is if I've got 5 years to make these changes, why haven't I done it? And the impetus to make me change it would be I no longer can get a rental certificate.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. And that's kind of the thought process that's coming down the line.
I don't speed in school zones.
Okay.
But I speed on the highway.
Okay.
Because I can get away with it and it doesn't hurt until I get a ticket.
Right.
If there was no speed limit, I have no idea what speed I'd go. But I generally go between 8 and 9 miles over. Or 7 and 8.
Right.
Because I know tickets get real big difference at 11 miles an hour over. And that's a risk I'm not willing to take. So if it does in fact work for 99% of the drivers on the road, don't you think having some sort of incoming negative effect being added to your life, loss of income or whatever, so to me that would make a difference?
It totally would. And what you find is you see that pendulum kind of switch. Sometimes New York State seems like they're pro landlord, and other times they're pro tenant. So when you talk about these mandates, these landlords are the taxpayers, right? So they're the ones that can be able to say to legislators, hey, don't come down on me too hard about this issue. Give us some time to make some of these changes. But I think a lot of that is the time is up. They're putting public health at the forefront. You can also sweeten the pot and say, hey, for every house that you go rehab, I will do a pilot program where we'll cut your taxes by, often it's 100%, but let's say it's 50% and it goes back to 100 over 8 years. I think 8 years is usually the ramp up. Yep. So you'll save half your taxes year one for doing the remediation, and it would go up in half. 8 years on a half is a 16th progression, and at the end, I didn't get hit with a negative. I absorbed a positive for being proactive. The other problem with that too is when you have these mandates, do we have the capacity? Do we have the workforce that can do all of this? I know right here in Schenectady, there's tons of 2 families that still have a ton of lead paint in them. Mm-hmm. I see it all the time. Yep. So even if they're full gut rehabs, right? So even if that mandate was in place, and a landlord wanted to be compliant, if they can't do this work themselves because you have to have licensing and certificate to remediate lead, there's going to be a wait list and a backlog. How realistic can that get done? Yeah, the idea of putting men on the moon, people on the moon, was impossible for a long time until political will and the dollar bill backed it. Right. It can be done. It's all impossible until it's done. Right. I agree. So we just got but hey, okay. Thank you for that. That was fun. Yes. I like talking about big problems, even if we don't have a solution today. Right. At least we've talked about it. Correct. Right. So let's talk about radon for a minute. Okay. If I was asking, where does radon come from? Is it because does digging my basement cause radon, or does
people living near me cause radon? Where is the source of radon?
So for those that are listening or watching that don't know what radon is an organic compound, a gas that actually comes from digging within the earth. So think about uranium off-gassing. It's found in the soil. So typically when you build a house, you're going to start with some sort of excavation, right?
Sure.
So you're going to put your foundation or your slab down inside soil, and that soil is around you 360. Every home has a level of radon in it as a result of this natural occurring gas that's around it. That radon permeates through the walls and can get into your basement. If it gets in there at high enough levels, then if that gas is lighter than air, it's going to rise and go into the living space. And a lot of times we're seeing now people have basements that are converted to living spaces. So radon is a natural occurring breakdown of uranium that's in the soil. So you can't get rid of it. The goal is to try to minimize the amount that we're exposed to.
Now, let's talk about a radon test coming back high. What's the threshold between high and low?
So the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, set a level, they say at 4.0 picoliters, I believe it is. Okay. It's broken down into, they consider that a relatively high amount of radon. Okay. So what we do is there's different methods, but you can take canisters that are made out of charcoal, and those canisters are set up in the basement and they're left for X amount of time, and those canisters absorb a certain amount of that radon that's in the air. Then we send those canisters off to a lab. That lab looks at the amount of time that the radon was, the canisters were left in there.
Exposure time.
Yes, exposure time, and then they measure them and they'll send you back those results. And if those results are anywhere around 4.0, EPA mandates that you have a radon mitigation system installed in the home. A radon mitigation system is essentially a fan that turns on, or a vacuum that turns on and sucks that harmful gas and dispels it to the outside air.
Now, I've seen in my career less than 10 of those systems.
A lot of people are unaware of them.
Yeah. Yep. Now, if I have a high water table and a radon mitigation system, that's sucking the air from beneath slab, right?
Correct.
At what point does that just suck up all the groundwater and shoot out the side of the house too?
Very
How do you prevent that?
Yeah, very good question. So sometimes in basements you'll see vapor barriers. Sometimes you'll see now they're talking about watertight on your actual exterior, your concrete walls. There's different things that you can do, but that's more new technology and more new information for new builds. If you have a high water table, water is one of the things that can affect these radon levels. So if you have a high water table, you may have a sump pump. And if you have a sump pump, that's essentially a hole that's cut into your slab, which is going to allow more of that air or that gas to come into the basement.
Now I'm in a super curious spot because I want to know if you took a radon sample during a high water table moment versus a low water table. Let's say snow melt and summer drought. And the water table's shifted a couple feet. Would you, is it possible or probable to have a different radon level?
100%. Your radon levels could change with just rain.
Wow, I did not. That's something I hadn't considered. That's wicked interesting.
So your soil's going to be softer, which may allow that gas to come in easier. So radon levels they change for a variety of reasons. Seasonally, they change.
I guess in a drought, I wonder if because I'm from a real heavy clay area, and when it dries, you get these cracks that you could lose your keys into.
Correct.
Right? I wonder in a drought if that just creates channels for more air exchange.
I think that's a safe assumption. That makes sense.
I had never considered rain and moisture as a part of that. So let's assume high water table. Is there a way to do like a radon mitigation system that doesn't go below slab? Can I just rotate the air in the basement?
Yes.
Okay, so there is a possibility if I wanted to build a home and do complete waterproofing where I could somehow add additives to the concrete to make it completely not permeable. Correct. No air, no water.
Correct. Which I don't know that is always the best thing either, but...
Well, I want to get to that because I don't know what you mean by that, so I'm excited about that. But let's say I did that, and it was perfectly impermeable.
Right.
But somehow, magically, I was still getting radon. I could do a different system as opposed to putting a hole in my basement slab.
Correct.
And okay. That's interesting.
Yeah, so there's a certain, your house functions as a unit, so there's a certain amount of circulation that you kind of want. So when you create a scenario where something's totally example, where you can't have any kind of moisture coming in at all,
Yeah.
you start to think, all right, well, how is this going to breathe? Right?
Yeah.
Obviously, in basements, oftentimes you can have windows, you can have other ventilation systems, but you want to be able to make sure if you got a boiler in your basement, you got a hot water tank, now you got CO2 issues or carbon monoxide issues, you want to be able to create a scenario where that basement breathes.
Yeah,
So sometimes too tight can be a problem too. The other issue with too tight is if we have rainfall and your house is surrounded by cement, your basement surrounded by cement, and that rainfall comes off the eaves of the roof and soaks into that soil, what happens when soil gets wet? Kind of expands.
I don't know. You're getting me. Okay.
Yeah, it kind of expands, right?
Okay.
You've seen mudslides, right?
Yeah.
So you can create a condition called hydrostatic pressure, where you actually have moisture that's hitting the soil, and it's caused that soil to be soft, and that soil will start to spread. And if that moisture can't wick through your concrete brick, now you're creating a condition where that moisture may push on the brick. So yes, it's not allowing the moisture in, but now you're creating a worse problem because now you got pressure push.
I wonder if you could have enough pressure and such an impermeable and strong foundation that the hydrostatic pressure would pop the house out of the ground. Theoretically, anything's possible,
yes,
right?
Right.
Man, I don't know. Now we're just having fun. Okay, so we talked about in the country we're going to do well testing.
Yes.
You put a little pressure on the waistline system. Would you recommend if someone's buying a country home to have a secondary, like someone come out from a septic tank company and take a looky-loo?
100%.
I see.
And that can get costly because in order for them to be able to verify the integrity of that septic tank, what does that mean? That means
they're doing a pump out.
They got to pump out. They got to drain all of that out there and then actually get down in there.
Yeah.
And very seldom do you see home inspectors have that level of equipment to be able to do it. So it's usually something that's outsourced to a whole nother septic company that does it.
Yeah, but that's okay. I mean, you could do the same thing with a chimney inspection.
Correct. Same exactly.
Right. So maybe before you throw wood in that cute little fireplace, I
Right.
got one coming up on Central Parkway.
Yep.
2 fireplaces, no
Okay.
big deal.
Okay.
You might say, "Hey, I love the house." Before I start utilizing the fireplaces,
Right.
have someone go in and look at it.
Right.
And they probably have specialized tools and skills
cameras
too.
that they can go up in there. So what would be smart is if they hired you because you're the type of,
I'll take that as a comment. All right, I like it.
You're the type of realtor that's going to schedule all of those things at the exact same time. So it's not a scenario where we're waiting for all of
Plus,
these
I'll
results.
bring the stuff to make s'mores because we're having a wood fire, right?
Right.
Let's have fun with it.
Right.
Cool. Is there any topics that we didn't touch on that you wanted to? We talked about radon, septic, sewer.
We talked about pass or fail. Part of what I wanted to talk about is the growing need for home inspectors.
Oh,
So-
I like it already.
I'm big on trying to create opportunities for others in the industry as well. So they typically say, a rule of thumb, for every 10 realtors, there's only 1 home inspector.
I show a lot of houses before I get to the point where I call you.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not a big upfront cost to become a licensed home inspector. There's not a ton of schooling involved in it, and you can make a livable wage. The average home inspection for me, I charge around $500. So if I do 2 home inspections in a day and I work 5 days a week, you can kind of do the math.
You're doing good.
Yeah, you still got some other soft costs. There's still insurances. There's still gas. There's still marketing. There's still equipment. There's a couple of these different things that you're going to have to onboard. But for the most part, if anybody's interested, I did my training almost 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
I've been doing it since 2016.
And you have to take, 22 hours of continuing education every 2 years?
24.
Oh, it went up.
Yeah,
It went up.
yeah,
We're getting
24,
better.
Yeah.
Oh, so something you learned 10 years ago may not be the exact same thing every 10 years or so? All
Information
right.
changes, yep. So every 2 years, I got to complete 24 hours.
Yep. We just did one, and we talked about having carbon monoxide detectors in a kitchen with
Right.
no gas.
Right.
And it's like, okay, well, why would you do this? And it was super interesting because they had a furnace in the attic, and you're like,
Right.
well, carbon monoxide is a heavier gas, and it
Correct.
drops. So
Correct.
in my mind, I'd put one directly underneath. I'd put it right on the ceiling or
Right.
in a corner,
Right.
and probably on the floor, whatever bedroom was below it.
Right.
Right, so I could catch if it was a big one, I could catch the carbon coming down,
Right.
and if it was slower but consistent, the floor, the room underneath near the floor, was
Right.
it like 18 inches, 16 inches?
Yes, around 16 to 18
Around
inches,
there.
that range. So what you see now is that you got combo detectors. You can have a smoke and a carbon all in one detector,
Yep.
right? So a lot of code is moving towards having both of those, and they want you to have those in close proximity to your appliance. So if there is a furnace in the attic, you want that carbon monoxide detector really close to that. So obviously, the sooner that gas hits that carbon monoxide detector, the sooner you're alerted as an occupant.
So I feel like there are certain things that I don't mind combos.
Yes.
Like I think they do KFC Taco Bell. What a great day.
Right.
Not a sponsor.
Right.
All right. But I don't know. Sometimes it's like if something were to go faulty, sometimes it's easier just to replace one head of the hydro as opposed to always
agree.
combos. Yeah, it's all right. Cool.
So what they're doing now is with smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors, they got technology that's tell you that they'll last 10 years. The big issue with fire detectors,
the sealed battery ones.
yes,
Yep.
is what happens when that battery dies and that smoke detectors, is making that noise. Instead of people changing out the battery, they just usually disconnect the smoke
disconnect the
detector.
battery.
Yeah,
Sure.
So if we can create a scenario where that battery lasts a lot longer, you're less likely.
Whose
to
fault is that when the battery goes off? The tenant unhooks it. Is that the landlord's fault?
It's a very good question because in most situations, an actual landlord doesn't know.
Yeah, I don't get it. I get it. Oh. So
No
the living room
notification
smoke
that
alarm
comes
is
in.
low battery. Let's head
Correct.
out there, buddy.
Correct. But I think the responsibility to maintain those, actually on the actual smoke detectors, they have a date and time that you're supposed to, initial that you install this carbon monoxide detector. But if you're a tenant and you've been renting and you have an issue with your smoke detectors, you can call your landlord. It is the landlord's responsibility to replace those.
As long as they're making the call.
Correct. And
You
that's-
can't say, "Hey, I have never talked to my landlord, or I don't even have his number."
Right.
And I want my vents cleaned, and I've got 3 chirping smoke
Right.
alarms, but I don't know his name. I don't know where he lives. I have no contact.
I'd take it a step further and say not only call, but leave a text.
Yeah.
Now you got a paper trail that's time dated.
Yeah. And for landlords and tenants out there, just remember that emails and text messages are legal forms of communication and can be used in court.
Yes, they
so
are.
don't say naughty things if you don't want it read back to, right? Don't text things you don't want read in court.
Right.
Cool. So because we're in Schenectady and 99% of the stuff in Schenectady County, let's say 80% of the stuff in Schenectady County is going to have public water and sewer.
Right.
If you had a house that hasn't been used in a long time,
Yes.
would you treat that in still good condition,
Yep.
but just not used in a long time? Would you treat anything in that house differently than a house that's currently lived in?
I actually would, for a variety of reasons. Mainly because we live in the Northeast, it can get extremely cold.
Sure.
So if we have a house and it looks to the eye like it's been in good condition, but it hasn't been occupied, I know that there's no heat that's been running on. So if there's if that house wasn't winterized the right way, there could have been water in a line that we can't necessarily see. And if we got a pipe that's burst that's behind the wall, that's something I can't see. So if I know a house has been vacant through a winter season, that does change the amount of scrutiny I want to put.
So you won't be able to see all the plumbing in a wall.
You cannot
right?
see all the
so
plumbing in the wall.
Do you turn the water on and hope for the best?
I do. And it's happened to me where I've actually turned waters on and not realized I might have turned the faucet on in the bathroom and had a leak at the trap underneath.
Yeah.
And now I'm scrambling trying to
Looking
dry
for
this
a
out.
bucket.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So, but the flip side to that is, hypothetically, my buyer buys that property. Yeah. They go to close. The moment they go in there and they have an issue, who do you think they're going to be turning to?
The agent that said when you buy a foreclosure at 10 cents on the dollar, go do an inspection.
Yeah, so if the inspection was done, they're automatically going to say, "Hey, John, why didn't you point this out?" You're paying for that expert eye.
Yes.
A layperson is going to overlook a lot of little things, but because I do this on a routine basis, you kind of get trained to know what to look for.
Yeah. One last thing we haven't talked about.
Okay.
Wood destroying insects. What do we have around here that eats wood all day, every day?
Yeah, so you got carpenter ants.
Yep.
You got post beetles.
Powder post. Have
powder
you ever
post
seen a
beetles?
powder post beetle alive? I've only seen the damage they've done. I've never seen one.
In all actuality, I have. I've actually seen one in a garage, exterior garage in actual Bellevue. And a friend of mine works for Orkin. So
Yeah.
what I did was I immediately took pictures and sent it over to him. you more likely than not you see the damage, but you don't actually see the insect alive. But in this,
I've been in a lot of houses.
Yes.
Are they as small as the holes they make?
they are not. So it's very important that you differentiate with regard to what animals or what insects, pests or insects, eat the actual wood, or what ones actually just destroy it to kind of tunnel through to kind of make places to lay their eggs.
Sure.
So they are a lot smaller than the actual holes they eat because they're going to eat through and create a spot where they can put their larvae.
I see.
Yeah.
Because I've seen the powder post, like you can whack a piece of wood and you get little literally powder.
Yes.
But those holes are not any bigger than a pencil lead.
Right.
So yeah, interesting. So you said carpenter
ants, carpenter bees.
Yep. Which are interesting because I've never seen them before, except in Troy they were eating the trim.
Okay.
And they are hard to keep out. They will go through the paint. They'll pull caulk. Those things are incredible.
Yeah, and what's important is once that tunneling becomes into the wood, now the actual integrity of the wood is not as strong.
Yep.
So in often cases, even if you were able to treat it, I would tell you to replace the wood.
Sure.
Yeah.
We're not done yet.
Okay.
There's one more.
Yep. So was it Mediterranean?
I know we have termites.
Definitely.
In Rotterdam.
Termites, yes.
I was told when we were looking, keep an eye out for those mud tubes because they can't, because they're like albino in color. They're colorless. They can't take the light.
Yep.
So I've seen them a couple times,
Okay.
but it's rare that I see those.
Yes.
What do you think is your most common wood destroying insect that you see?
What's tricky is oftentimes, like you said, you will see the damage and won't necessarily see the insect.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the damage looks similar. But if I know a lot of them are like to have wood that's soft or it's around water. So what I'm going to say, my experience so far, I've seen probably carpenter ants and the termite damage the most common.
Yeah. Now, so that's one of my. I'm glad you brought it up.
Okay.
I love it for that. Has to have water.
Yes.
If you have a perfectly dry roof system and a perfectly dry foundation, and you have perfectly dry plumbing,
Correct.
and you have a dry house except for what naturally we breathe in and out and the moisture from a shower before it gets vented,
Right.
either through a window or a vent, because you have to have one
Right.
minimally or both.
Right.
How often do you see, if everything is as dry as the day it was built, how often do you see wood destroying insects?
Do we have gutters too?
Let's say we do,
We do
and
have
we're not splashing
Okay.
against the foundation,
Right.
and let's say as intended, 12 inches between have and wood.
Right. Not as in my experience, have been as prominent. If you have all those conditions met, which very seldom happens.
We have an old housing stock,
right.
Sure.
So, but when you eliminate that water source, oftentimes that helps keep these pests away. I still, oftentimes in my report, include a disclosure that says contract with the pest company annually to have them come out, because what we know is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if we can keep the conditions the way they are, because things do erode and change over time, things break, so on and so forth. With that pest control company, there's chemicals that they can put down that kind of repel a lot of that.
I see. Yeah. I remember I was sitting in a living room on 9th Street on that house, and it was right before I replaced the roof. There was a little wet corner, and you could hear the crunching of the carpenter ants as they were working and eating and working and eating. And
do you know where the water leak came from?
Yeah, it had a slate roof at that point, and we had shed a couple roof shingles.
Yep, a couple pieces were missing.
So it was I had just gotten enough heat in there to have heat. And we were scheduled to replace the roof, I think, like when it warmed up so the shingles would actually lay down and stick.
Right.
And it drove me nuts. I think I bought like 2 squirt things. I was like just pouring it on, because I could get above it into like the rafter head and sprayed that thing. We got it. We killed it.
Right.
But it only had it in one spot.
Okay.
And it was like let's say a 3-foot semicircle radius around where the roof was leaking. And that's why I wanted to lead to if you keep it dry, if you replace your roof and you have good sealing and paint on your house and keep it dry, that's your prevention. Maintaining that house and keep it well. I don't have one question left. Do you have anything else you wanna jump in?
The only thing I want to touch on, and you kind of alluded to it earlier again, is the fact that the importance of the home inspection, right?
Sure.
So oftentimes purchasing of real estate is probably one of the biggest investments any of us are going to make. And what I see is oftentimes people will try to keep their costs as low as possible. And if they're not getting a loan, if the bank doesn't require it, then sometimes they don't go as far as they should with regard to a home inspection. So there's several different services. We touched on radon. Radon is an additional service. You touched on well testing. That's an additional service. But these things are important because you could actually save yourself thousands in the long runs. And oftentimes when I talk to customers, sometimes they think I'm trying to upsell them on these other services. And, you know.
Well, yes, right?
Right.
But also for a reason.
Right.
Right. So, no, I totally agree with that. I've actually had to remind cash buyers because the bank didn't require
An inspection.
nope,
Yep.
insurance.
Oh, insurance. Okay.
Because you have to buy insurance before or at closing.
Yes.
And I've called people up like 2 or 3 days later and said, "Hey, man, you insured the house yet?"
Right.
Like, no, oh my God. I said, "You just spent $250,000, bro.
Right.
It's not insured.
Right.
You're one match away from losing
Right.
$250,000. It's
So,
like,
funny story on that. Some people get insurance and don't have enough insurance. So I've
Yeah.
seen situations where a house is caught on fire.
And
The
you're
city
underinsured.
comes. Yeah. Well, they thought they had good coverage. The city comes and the house is a complete teardown. There's a bill associated with that teardown.
yeah.
And that homeowner insurance paid that bill, but they didn't have enough money left over to rebuild that house again.
Absolutely.
So they're essentially out of that asset.
Yeah.
Another issue with regard to insurance that I want to touch on briefly is because we live in the capital region, a lot of these houses are over a century old. It's knob and tube wiring. So knob and tube wiring is a hot button issue with regard to homeowners insurance too, because knob and tube wiring is essentially ceramic that's nailed into your wood joists.
And that part's called the tube.
That's the actual tube.
That's the tube.
And then you actually have that's the knob. The ceramic's the knob.
But the tube is made of ceramic too.
This tube is made
and
of
then
ceramic.
the knob is for when it changes direction.
Correct.
Yeah.
It spins. So now coming off of that, we have your wire. It's actually live wire that's got almost like a cloth around it, and that cloth has been treated. Because it's so old, it can break down, and now you got exposed wire. And the real issue is when we have some of that knob and tube mixed with the new H.O.M.E.S, the amount of current that electric wire can handle varies a great deal. And we have two different systems. That's the perfect breeding ground for
Yeah, you wouldn't want to
fire.
run like a 40 amp dipole
Right.
connecting to something like that, and
Right.
then 10 feet later go back to your
H.O.M.E.S.
bigger wire. Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to do in a home, and I'm always like a good home inspection is a good start, but I really want these houses that get flipped by almost everybody
Yep.
to have a really good scrutiny, because you can cover a lot,
Yes, you can.
like a lot.
Yep.
But there's a lot of people out there that take shortcuts.
Yes.
And you're like, well, what would it cost for a whole new electric system? You're like $13,000. You're like, well,
Right.
can I just replace outlets
Right.
for 4 or
Right.
3 or 2?
Right.
Yeah. So, I there's a couple things I don't shop for based
Right.
on price.
Right.
Doctors,
Yes.
lawyers,
Yes.
and home inspectors.
Right.
Like if you said, hey, I'll come out and look at it for 20 minutes for $50,
Right.
I'd be like, that's probably not any better than what I've done
Right.
showing the house in the dark.
Correct.
Right. So
Yeah.
I know people are scared about, that kind of quote unquote investment or expenditure.
Yes.
But if you're buying a $250,000 house and you're afraid to spend $500 on it,
Right.
I'm a little worried about
Right.
when your windows start to break.
Correct.
Or when a furnace that's 20 years old gets you 10 more years. Hey, great on you, but then
Right.
needs replacement. You're like,
Correct.
I can duct tape this.
Right. Yep.
So there are a lot of great benefits for home ownership. And we've talked about that before on previous episodes, but just know that that stability that you bring in your life will cost you money
Right.
now and forever,
Right.
slowly but surely.
And most things can be fixed. So, don't avoid fixing something that's a small problem that could, turn into a big problem later on.
Yep.
So, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I always try to tell the clients, let's take a look at what this is. You make an informed decision. You know what your risk aversion is. I got some suggestions. I can kind of give you an idea. Another thing that happens oftentimes is people say, well, what's this going to cost?
Yep.
What's this going to cost? And I can kind of give a range with regard to certain stuff, but different contractors have different pricing. If a person wants to replace cabinets, are we going with soft closed cabinets? Are we going with...
I get this question a lot, and I say, well, what? So I was in Gloversville. I used the exact example the other day on our home inspection on Montgomery. How much is that going to cost? I say, how much is a car? Montgomery is not a Ferrari. Gloversville is not a Ferrari neighborhood right now.
Right.
It's on its way up.
Right.
But let's pick a car we all know. Let's say a Hyundai or a Kia.
Right.
Kind of an entry level car.
Yep.
Right. And if we said a Kia Rio, it's an entry level car and an entry level car manufacturer.
Right.
Well, there's like 4 trim levels.
Right.
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 And then the moment I get that car, I go wrap it, and I put Bose or some other. It's hard for me not to accidentally name drop because I'm not trying to sell any of this stuff.
Right.
But yeah, I go aftermarket sound system and I put a spoiler on a big. I
rims.
do not have the same car as I started, and that starting car at the highest trim level is not the same car as a basic.
Right.
So when I ask people, what am I going to get for rent? What's the price of a car?
Right.
I don't know.
Correct.
The person you're hiring.
Correct.
And I don't know the quality of materials they're installing.
Right. Their craftsmanship.
You tell me how can I answer that question?
Fairly, yes.
So I tell this.
Yes.
I realize it's probably a stupid story, but in my mind, it's not the best question.
Correct.
I understand why you're asking.
Right.
But I have so many follow-up questions at that point.
Right.
How can I give you an answer without 15 questions first?
Correct.
All right. Well, Dave, I want to use quartz because I don't want to seal it ever again. Okay, quartz, great.
Right.
All hardwood cabinets, great. Okay,
Yes.
soft close, great. Any glass in those cabinets? Because you put glass in a cabinet door, it's $300 extra for the door.
Yes, just for the aesthetic.
So how many glass doors do you want? Once a rental, I'll go with 2. Okay,
Right.
so plus 600.
Right.
I want all glass because it's my kitchen. Well, it's another $3,000 in glass.
Backsplash.
Real wood, hardwood,
Yes.
laminate. I'm
Right.
so sick of laminate, but yeah. So. Well, I think this has been a fun conversation. I've had a blast, and I knew some of the answers, and I learned some, so I love that. And
that's my goal. I try to make not only my agents but my buyers feel informed. That's how I try to differentiate myself and try to create a niche for my market share. As I want you to go into an inspection and actually walk around with me. And you don't feel like you're micromanaging, and I'll point specific things out so that way when you get your report, you can understand what you're looking at.
Yeah, you've learned half of it already.
Correct.
That's why I often, if I follow someone, I try to hang back.
Right.
Or I'm in there looking with it, and I try not to talk too much because that's not my job. There, I'm not there to intercede or interfere with that conversation. But I have heard my dad talk about it. I'm sure you have too.
Yes.
There are agents that go in there,
Yep.
and they'll talk and they'll point and they'll distract.
Yes.
And it erodes the quality of
The inspection,
your
yes.
well, not the inspection, but your education piece during the inspection.
So if you have an agent that's talking a long time, the exact same time you're talking, oftentimes they're putting a spin on things. That's why I say it can compromise the
I see,
And you only have X amount of time. The client doesn't want to be there indefinitely, and neither does the agent. So my typical inspection may take me an hour to an hour and a half, depending on the size of the property. During that time, I want to give you value. I want to be able to give you information. So if I have to compete with the agent, oftentimes that can affect the quality of the inspection.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that.
Yeah.
I want any agents that are listening, we don't change the condition of the house, and neither do you.
Right.
You're just inspecting it.
Correct.
Right.
That's it.
So, some people are, some inspectors are called deal killers. I'm like, you didn't cause that floor joist to rot out. You didn't bring in a handful of carpenter ants last week.
That's your perspective.
Yeah.
'Cause
I didn't bring in a handful of carpenter ants last week to ruin the house so we can negotiate on it. I want the house to be exactly as we expected it to be.
Right.
So in my mind, a home inspection says, hey, discounted house.
Yep.
It's in discounted condition. I don't want a prime house to be in discounted condition.
Correct.
If we're lucky, we get a discounted house in prime condition.
Right.
But I don't want to come into a house and say I have 5 majors, which the threshold is
$2,000 now.
The new contracts,
Yes,
and I
yes,
just switched
yes,
over, so
yes.
mine's 2,000.
And that's something that's synonymous with the capital region too. So if you can go outside the capital region, I've done inspections as far south as Yonkers, and as far as
Really?
west as Syracuse.
Yeah.
And when I talk about majors, those rules don't necessarily apply.
Yep.
That $1,500 threshold, that's now $2,000 threshold. That's something that our area does.
And that's negotiable.
That is negotiable.
We
It
can
is.
do a contract that says a $5,000 major. If it's
100%.
not a furnace blowing up,
Correct.
it's not a big deal.
Correct.
Yeah, we've jumped around a lot, but
But
it's
I
good.
think we covered a lot. and
Cool.
I appreciate
yeah.
talking to you. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thank you for your second appearance on the podcast.
All right.
And if one more time on your website,
Tri-City Pro Home Inspections.
if you guys have any questions, you can talk to John Howard here, and his information will be put on the podcast. So if you're listening to this in the car, in between some other really great OSM stuff, like there's one about the play that changed my life, which that guy's voice is wonderful to hear in the car.
Okay.
And I know there's another one coming up. They've got a future schedule of another podcast coming in, I think in the next couple weeks. I think it might be the historic. Yeah, there we go. I got the thumbs up from the
Okay.
producer in the car. Thank you.
Yes.
The Historic Society is going to do one. I listen to that stuff because I just don't always, I grade myself heavily on how I speak.
Yes.
And I try to learn from my past mistakes
Correct.
or too many pauses or ums or
Right.
if.
Right.
But I do like the other stuff. So, but if you want to take a look at any of the information we presented here, sometimes that's uploaded on the YouTube channel. Like
Okay.
it'll say John Howard,
Yes.
and it'll show his website and his phone number most likely.
Yes.
And if you're looking for an agent that has these fun conversations, I'm Dave Kellogg, and my information's also there.
Thank you, Dave.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you, and thank you again.
Alrighty.